I'm Andy Cutright. I work with Anything Social. Tonight we're going to take a very high-level tour of the Open Graph apps platform for Facebook. So basically, if there's an emergency during this demonstration, it's such a high level that oxygen masks will descend from the ceiling. So, you know. Yeah, I worked on that one all afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So, like I said, I work for Anything Social. We're a social consulting firm, and Ian's explained to you guys what we do. I don't think one thing Ian brought up was that if you're smart, you get things done. You like working Ruby and Rails. You like working on a lot of different stuff. You like interesting challenges. We'd love to talk to you. I'm sure everybody here is well employed. Almost everybody is in this world. You can reach me at this email address, and you can reach any of us at this at this domain by our names. So with that, let's move on and talk about what we're going to talk about. So what is the Open Graph? You can really think of the Open Graph in two different ways. You can think of it in terms of a data structure, or you can think of it in terms of the data it contains and what it really means. So as a data structure, it's really just a big graph. You have a RESTful view of the relationships between people and objects on Facebook. You access it by making HTTP requests. You know, you can use wget, curl, Facebook2, RESTgraph, whatever it is you want to use. And you get back JSON data structure. The simplest, easiest to understand example of how you access the graph is accessing the current user. So you need, these URLs, you need an access token. So I think most of you hopefully are familiar with Facebook development and authorization. If you're not, we can talk about that afterwards. So you make this call and you get back a JSON data structure. So the graph is basically easily understood as a set of URLs, a set of resources, nested resources, and the nesting resources explain the relationships between the things. I think importantly though, the Open Graph is actually about the relationships of people and objects and actions on Facebook and in the world. So the Facebook Open Graph as it's implemented right now in terms of the things that are in the graph, that is the pieces of your life, because it is your life in there. It's my life anyway. I don't know about the rest of you. The way that they've structured the graph is basically in terms of a has-a relationship. So friends, you're going to have, a user is going to have friends. A user is going to have albums. A user is going to have groups. And these are relationships between you, your friends, and things, right? So it's not really that interesting, you know, it's just like a box of stuff. Now here we see a URL again, back to the computer science world, the real simple way to access graph data, me, friends. This explains very clearly the relationship between me, that user that you're working with at the time, and what it is that you're looking at relative to the person. So here we're looking for the friends. The other thing that you see on Facebook and everywhere in the world these days is the ubiquitous like button. Now, one of these things is not like the other. Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'll be here all week. So basically, like is not a has a relationship. Like is more active. When a person likes something, they're actively participating with that object. They're not simply gathering it or curating it. It's acting on something. So you like a page, or you like somebody's political views, or you like some comment, you know. So what the Open Graph is about is changing the way that things relate to one another and allowing you, the developer, and your users to expand the sorts of relationships and content within the Open Graph. So we see here, this is a graphic that I've shamelessly stolen from Facebook, so please don't sue me for copyright. And we can see the traditional sort of relationships in the graph. So you see this person is a friend with this person likes Facebook, but you see some other stuff here. This person watches Netflix. This person cooks a recipe. This person listens to Spotify. So if any of you have any sort of just casual interaction with Facebook, how many of you guys use Facebook on a regular basis? Okay, yeah, okay, good. So, okay, who has never liked something? Raise your hand. Ah, Ken. Right on. Okay. So you understand now, you're starting to see things like Spotify, Mog. You're starting to see apps like the Washington Post Social Reader. So these are Open Graph app platform applications. And what they're doing is expanding the vocabulary of the graph. They're adding new relationships, and they're changing how people interact with Facebook, how they interact with the sites, and how they interact with one another. And that's a pretty exciting sort of thing. So you can, what Facebook is offering is the ability to define new actions and objects. So, for instance, liking is an action. You like a page, for instance, right? So I just like George Takei, right? He's hilarious. So what you're getting is the ability to define for your application and for your users some way to add relevant information to the graph to get them to interact with the graph in a way that makes sense for your site. So again, one of the things that's really cool about the Open Graph app platform is that it continues to use the standard sort of RESTful resource approach, and it's very understandable. Here we've got, we'll talk more about this URL in a little while, but basically what we've got is a graph call to the current user for a particular action for a particular object. So again, the relationships are explained very clearly in the URL. They're made very plain in a RESTful manner. So the implementation and architecture is really straightforward. If you've been working with the graph at all, this is really not a big leap. There's just a few key concepts to understand, and you should be up and running pretty rapidly. So the question is, why would I want to do this? Well, your content is going to get splattered all over Facebook. You're going to, yeah, that sounded good, didn't it? So you're going to see your activities you're going to see your vocabulary, you're going to see your objects, you're going to see your actions up on your user's timeline. You're going to see it posted into the friends news feed. You're going to see it posted into the ticker, and all of these postings have links that are live that will drive back to your site, and they also provide an ability for you to actually drive authorization when the user clicks the link, so that if somebody visits Red's profile and clicks a link and is driven through your site, the authorization dialogues are automatically going to pop up with the appropriate permission requests, which is fantastic. Okay, so now at the end of the day, what you're going to get is more traffic to your site, which is really what everybody here, I think, is about. Well, maybe not. Maybe you're about helping kids learn math. Maybe you're about helping people volunteer. Maybe you're about helping people contribute to charities. Maybe you're about improving somebody's life in some other manner. So actions and objects give you the vocabulary to be able to do that. So you could build an app, for instance, that helps people tutor children. So you would tutor, that would be the action, and you would have this object, a child, I suppose. I don't know if that really, that's not such a great relationship. But you can imagine applications that would not just be profit-driven, but would be descriptive of the sort of goals that you want to achieve, political, social, whatever. So there's a lot of things that can be achieved, and there's a lot of things that I'm sure people here can imagine that they might want to build that the Open Graph app platform is going to allow. So, okay. Now, to make this a little more concrete, we're going to look at a demo that I put together. And this is the most fantastic demo on the face of the planet. So let's take a look. And this is puggers.com. Now, I know everybody loves pugs, right? It's the perfect dog. There's no question about it. Okay. So what we have here is the new vocabulary in action. So the first thing we're going to do is log in. And we're going to see something interesting here. This is the new enhanced auth dialog. So this makes securing permissions from your users, I think, a lot less scary. It's a two-phase process. The first thing you're presented with is the basic permissions. And then if you request additional permissions, you'll be presented with a second dialog. So we're going to go ahead and say, happy, happy, joy, joy. Let's log in. And here is the second half of the auth dialog. I've added this. I don't really need publish stream permissions. I just threw it in there to demonstrate this. One of the things you want to notice is that you can selectively veto. They have line item veto power now. So you need to be prepared to deal with the situation where a user may authorize your app, but not all the permissions that you expect to get. So don't assume that. And then another neat thing is that you've got an ability to explain why you want these permissions. And then you can see you've also got a little more real estate to sort of fancy up the app to make it look more like it belongs to your application, which is pretty cool. Every day I go to look at this, it changes. Right now, the Open Graph app platform is in a lot of flux. There's a lot of bugs, and I'm finding them very, very responsive. They're actively paying attention to this. They're working hard with the community to make sure that things got fixed. And in fact, this didn't work until this morning, which is really cool. I was very happy about that. Yeah, because that's what you want to wake up and find out that your demo isn't going to work, right? That's great. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and allow that. Okay, so all right, now I want to hug a pug. So let's see, we've got Marty and Pissy and Eddie and Everlasting. So we'll go with Pissy. Okay, so yeah, isn't she beautiful? She looks great in a bikini. So what we've got here are the two major components of the Open Graph. We've got an object, which is a pug, and we've got an action, which is a hug. Okay, so let me put this down a second, and Okay, so I'm showing you this. We'll talk about this some more later, but objects have meta properties, and it's important that you define them appropriately, and Facebook has a bunch of tools to help you do this correctly. It's really not that difficult, just a matter of spitting out some properties. So we'll talk about that more later. Okay, so, all right, let's hug Pissy. Hey, you hugged a pug. Okay, so aren't you happy now? Don't you feel better? Don't you feel better? I feel better. I know I do. Okay, so what happened? Okay, first of all, we're going to have to reload the page. And there we go. So Puggers test recent activity. We hugged Pissy. So that shows up in the user's timeline. And then if this user had any real friends, it would probably end up in their news feed as well. But Facebook has determined that, in fact, Mike Smith isn't really a real person and doesn't do things with him that I'd like him to do. So and we can see here, this would drive you through, if a new user came through, this would drive you through the auth dialog, and you can see that you're going to be driven back to the site, and this is going to occur throughout Facebook. So you're going to be able to drive a lot of traffic to your site this way. So, okay. And in all honesty, that's not really Pissy, that's Marty. I just only have one picture. So, and that's Eddie, by the way. So that's real, you know, I love my pugs. Okay, so enough of that crazy stuff. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, it's impossible. You can't. No, it's really, really straightforward. So for any of you guys and gals that have been working with the Graph API or with the Facebook JavaScript SDK, this code should be pretty familiar. For those of you who haven't, the FB API, this is provided by the Facebook JavaScript SDK. All we're doing here is making a post to a RESTful resource. Again, really simple, really straightforward. We're associating the current user, me, with an action, OG sleeping pug, hug, pug equal document location.href, which happens to be the URL that I want to associate with the object. And that's it. I mean, that's the only additional call you have to make for this stuff to work. So all you need to do is drop in, 10 lines of code here, and the world is going to work for you. So really, really great. So, all right. Now, let's talk about the major pieces. So there's objects, actions, and aggregations. Really, really straightforward stuff, okay? It's best, I think, to grasp them in terms of what they are to us. Objects are nouns, actions are verbs, all right? So the object, you've got a pug in our case. So the actions are, in our case, hug. So in the Washington Post social reader, you've got read, right? And then in Spotify or Mog, you've got listen, and you've got songs. And in some of the Facebook demo apps, you have, for instance, recipes, and you have running. And you can start to imagine that there's all kinds of objects and actions that you could add to the graph and make your application much more compelling. Excuse me. Okay, so one thing here, aggregations, what this is an element that shows up on the user's timeline, and it basically associates object action pairs in a set context. There's a variety of layouts for this, which you can control through the Facebook admin tools for the application. This is a gallery layout, and it lists the pugs that were hugged by a particular user in October in order of how often they hug the pug. And clearly, Pissy is the winner here, right? I mean, she's the cutest, right? So, okay. So, now, nouns and verbs make sense to us, but they don't necessarily make sense to the Graph API, and they don't necessarily make sense to computers per se. So, objects. We earlier looked at the header, right? And we saw these meta properties. And you can see this is completely unreadable, but I'll talk about it shortly. So the objects are literally a resource accessible via HTTP. Facebook is going to crawl and validate every one of your objects. They have a specific user agent so you can recognize it and feed them a page that you might want to give them that doesn't require an authorized user, for instance, right? So, but has all this data. So you can see again, we've got a URL, really simple, straightforward, that identifies the particular instance of the object. And let's talk a little bit about the meta properties. So there, in this blurb, are the absolute minimum requirements of the meta properties. So you'll see things like, for instance, the Facebook app ID. That's assigned by Facebook. That has to be associated with every object in your application or on your site. Then we've also got the OG type. So in my case, OG sleeping pug, pug. So all instances of the pug object share a type. Now, the interesting thing beyond that is these other properties like the image or the description. Now, you can imagine, like on my site, that you would want users to be able to upload their own pugs so other people would hug them, or they could hug their own pugs, right? So the question is, how does an object get created? Well, an object has to be defined through the Facebook tooling. The object definition, you can think of that really like a Ruby class or a C++ class. And then the instances are published. So here we see pugs 8. So we can imagine pugs 75, pugs 12,000, you know, or you could have an SEO'd slug here or something, whatever you want, right? So the user and yourself would cooperate to create an instance of the object. So the pug might have a different picture, the pug might have a different description, the pug might have a different name. Another really neat thing about the objects is that you can add custom properties to it. So for instance, pugs come in 3 flavors. They fawn, black, and brindle. So yeah, I'm obsessed with pugs. So you might want to allow the user to specify what color the object is. So you can also, for instance, imagine in a recipe or a cooking application that you would want to say this is a vegan recipe, or you might want to say this is a vegetarian recipe, or this is a dairy-free recipe, or whatever. So there's all kinds of ways to associate properties and stuff with a particular object. But again, an object has to have a real instance, and it has to be crawlable. Oh, so, and then one more thing, this last URL down here, there's tools that will allow you to actually ask Facebook whether this object is properly formed. And once you get the object, you know, the templates going, you get your views set up and you get your handles set up. Usually this is not worth a lot unless you start to see some weird problems. But here we're asking Facebook to tell us whether pug number 6 is properly formed. So, and that can be really useful during development as you're starting to try to build this thing. Okay, so actions, what are actions? Again, verbs. But they're really, I like to think of them as edges connecting the user to the object, you know, in terms of a data structure. So again, these are defined by the application developer with the Facebook tools. There's no URL like there is for the object per se when you initially create the action. But this is going to actually, once the user acts on the object, you're going to actually end up with an instance in the graph. So there's not only an edge, there is properties associated with the action edge that you can see. And another great thing about the actions is just like the objects, you can associate custom properties with the actions. So in the Facebook applications, the demo apps, one of them is a running app. So you would say, for instance, I ran for 5 hours, right? I mean, I don't know who runs for 5 hours, not me. But you can associate any variety of properties with the actions. So these are very extensible data structures that are going to make it very possible for you to build really imaginative applications. So, okay, and the next stuff. So we're really not going to go into a lot of details here. This is, like I said, a real high-level tour. There is some setup stuff. It's mostly just, for those of you who've built applications, it's really straightforward to define the properties and to configure the application. But there are some landmines. So I want to be able to help you start. So in addition to the little bit of JavaScript that you need to add, you need to watch out for 3 landmines. First of all, the Open Graph application all need the enhanced auth dialog. So you need to make sure that you set that up. You need to create at least one aggregation. So it's possible, it has been possible in the past, I don't know if it's still possible, but it has been possible in the past to actually create actions and objects without an aggregation. If you don't do that, oh, you can't do that anymore? Oh, but you still can build the app, right? So you can find yourself in this situation where the app mysteriously doesn't work, and it's completely unclear why. Well, it's probably because you didn't create the aggregations. So you need to create at least one aggregation, and then one more thing, when you're creating the aggregation, you have to create the preview object first. This is the worst dialogue I have ever seen. So this is how you create an aggregation. So what do you want to do here? Tell me which button you want to click. Okay. Yeah, thanks Brian. Okay. So you want to click the thing up on the upper right. So you want to do what it says. It says there's no preview actions. Okay, well that's the first thing. That's the upper right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click that. No, don't do that. The first thing you want to do is create a preview object. So just click Add New and accept all the defaults. You can go back and edit this stuff later, so don't worry about it. It's fungible. Don't worry about it. Just to get started, just do this. Click the preview object, Add New, accept all the defaults. So then you're going to create the preview action. And the interesting thing up here is the last line here, where it says joke, reference, sample joke. This box right here is a drop down. And when you click on it, it'll drop down and it'll show you the sample object, whatever object type it is you created. In this case, it was a joke. I was creating another app to rate jokes. So in this case, it's a sample joke, and you need to make sure you populate that properly. So just take what it tells you, click OK, and you're done. And at that point, you're now going to be able to actually use your action and your objects in your application. So questions? The first question was permissions. Yeah, can the user control the permissions? Yeah, you all know that Facebook is really working hard to battle Google Plus and also to keep up with all the complaints from all over the world from governing bodies about privacy issues. So I think we saw initially when we logged in, you may have noticed that there was a default public button. They can select so that it doesn't show up at all. So you could imagine, like for instance, you might have an application that is for alcoholics, right, that want to quit drinking, right? They don't want to tell people that they're alcoholics. They don't want that published, right? So that won't show up, right? They can selectively disable what is shown. And then in terms of analytics, they offer insights, and they offer insights on an object level, I believe. So really, I haven't really delved a lot into the insights yet, and I don't want to speak to that. There is some documentation on there about choices about you would make about how you would relate objects to one another that affect the insight. Okay, well, thank you very much for sticking around and listening to my Podge talk.